Hey, what's up? And thanks for watching TopKlass tutorials. In this video, I'm going to be answering some questions from some previous videos, and just try to demonstrate some more audio production tips and tricks. So I got Pro Tools open here, and I went ahead and just kind of got everything set up for the session. First question that I got was, make this bigger so I can see it. Y'all can't see what I'm seeing, but so this question comes from My Stuttering Life. Your great video popped up on my feed, and I wanted to ask if you also have shortcuts for podcasters. I left Audacity because my Waves Clarity VX plugin did not work, so now I'm in the paid version of Pro Tools, and it looks very daunting once you're in the start screen. Thanks. So thanks, Stuttering Life, for the comment. For podcasters, yeah, there are some shortcuts, and I used to use Audacity way back in the day, and I really don't like that program. I use Waves plugins also. My one suggestion would be, if you're doing just podcasts, I would suggest using a different. Excuse me. I would suggest using a different DAW. I just don't see a reason why you would have to pay for using audio software when there's some other ones out there that you only have to buy one time and you own it for life. I'm not going to shout any of them out, but go do some research. I would suggest using a different software than Pro Tools. But if you are going to use Pro Tools, that's great, because I'll be demonstrating a lot of these shortcuts in Pro Tools. Some of them exist in other programs as well. So in my session, I have two audio tracks, and I also have a talkback microphone right here just so you can hear me. But I'll be demonstrating some other stuff with that later. So I have two audio tracks labeled Mic 1 and Mic 2, and it's supposed to be a fake conversation as though I was doing a podcast. I basically just wrote a script for myself and just answered. And you'll notice there are a couple issues in there that need to be fixed. Excuse me. And I'll show you how to do that. So I'll just play what we have so far so you can get an idea. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Thanks. So my name is Travis Jackson, and I'm sorry, could you lean a little bit closer to the microphone? Yeah, sure. How's this? Perfect. Yeah, so my name is Travis Jackson, and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment. And today I wanted to talk about, can I start over? Yeah, sure, no problem. Start over. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson, and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment. And today I wanted to talk about how to properly set up and record podcasts. Okay, so a couple things in there. The first mistake was when I started talking right here. I wasn't close enough to the microphone, and there was a dialogue, me telling myself to move closer to the microphone. And then when I started describing what I was there for, I made a mistake and asked if I could start over, and then I said it correctly. So we need to fix those two mistakes. And the thing with doing podcasts, and really anything that involves just talking, it has to be recorded in time. For example, you're doing an interview. You just press record and you let the interview go. Like, you don't stop and go back to a location. So you want to keep everything in time. If I start making audio edits right here and just start moving just this, well, then all of a sudden all this material is no longer in time with the rest of the conversation. And then I have to manually move that to where I need it to go. And there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. It's just there's a much faster and simpler way to go through and edit audio. So in Pro Tools, there is a mode called shuffle mode. And when you put it in shuffle mode, what it will automatically do is, if you select a range and delete it, it will then automatically slide all of this to over here. So I'll demonstrate that real quick. If I just select this area and press delete, watch what happens to this clip right here. It automatically gets moved over. And this is great for when you need to remove things that you don't want. So for example, when I start talking really low and then I tell myself to speak up and then I come back in right here, we'll go ahead and just press delete and all of our material has been moved over. Now the other thing is that we probably also don't want this exchange of conversation right here because it was a mistake. So we'll just go ahead and select that area and press delete. And now we'll play it about halfway through and see what we got. Special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment, and today I wanted to talk about how to properly set up and record podcasts. So that is how you would do your editing after your recording is done. Now, for recording, there is a trick that you can do. I'll bring my start playhead right up here. So I've done this a lot for not really podcasts or interviews or things like that. I do this a lot for when I'm doing audiobooks and things of that nature, where there is a moment where you might need to stop and take a break and then start back. And to make things easier, by default in Pro Tools, I'll just set up a track to record here. I don't want the same microphone. So say you got this track set up to record and I press record. It will start recording, and then when I press stop, the playhead will jump back to the very beginning of where I started recording. So it'll start back right here. Now say you're recording for a really long time, like, you're recording for maybe 30 minutes and your clip extends way out here, right? So say you got like an audio clip that comes way out here, and instead of you having to manually go and place your playhead and then start recording where you stopped, there's a trick in Pro Tools that you can do that allows you just to kind of just keep going. And it's also really good for when you're doing editing as well. So I'll show you what I mean. So we'll insert our playhead right here, and say we want to kind of just go through this audio and make sure it's all good. So we'll insert our playhead right here, and then in pre-roll, we can just set this up to be a bar or a couple seconds, depending on what you're in, whether you're in bars and beats or if you're in minutes and seconds. And we'll press play, and we'll turn on insertion follows playback. That's this little blue button right here, gray button, and it's active when it's blue. And there's a fast way to do it. If you have keyboard shortcuts enabled, you can press N and it will disable and enable insertion follows playback. So I'll leave that enabled and I'll press play, and watch what happens when I press stop. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. So everything sounds good up until that point, and when I press stop, you'll notice that the playhead has moved where I stopped it. Watch again. Music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss. So you see how the playhead moves when I stop? So as I'm going through and editing this audio, I can just press stop if I hear a mistake. And because I have pre-roll enabled, it'll kind of go and start a little bit before where I stopped and listen again to see if there's a mistake that I need to fix. We have a special guest that's going to. Today we have a special guest and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new special guest tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new special guest that's today we have a special so you can see I can just kind of just rapidly double click the space bar or just press play and stop, and it'll kind of go back a little bit to the areas that I'm trying to work on, and it'll play it through, and then it'll go back over again. And then once I'm done with that section, it'll just keep on going. And tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. So let's say I want to stop right there. Boom. I press stop and it automatically stopped. Ask the guy, hey, are you ready to start recording? Yeah, I'm ready. Cool. Great. And so then I can start recording right here. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay. So my name is Travis Jackson, and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment. And today I wanted to talk about how to properly set up and record podcasts. And boom, I can just press stop right there. Automatically moves the playhead, take a break. People can drink of water. And then we start the interview all over again. Record podcasts. Boom, just like that. So insertion follows playback, great for editing when you're doing projects, just kind of going through long time-based projects and you want to keep the playhead moving. Super convenient, easy. Another thing that is good for when you're doing podcasts is creating headphone sends. So here's a scenario. Say you have two people doing an interview, and person one, they want their headphones on, but they don't want to hear their voice when they're talking. When they hear their voice, it throws them off, or they only want to hear their voice just a little bit. Second scenario, person two, he wants to hear his voice louder than anybody else. Like they, feel like they do better interviews and they sound better when they hear themselves more. But obviously, if I turn up person two too much, it can cause problems for everyone else. Not everyone else maybe wants to hear person two as loud as they want to. And in the scenario of person one not wanting to hear anything at all, well, they may not want to hear their voice at all, but the other people need to be able to hear their voice to hear what it sounds like and have the conversation. So a couple ways you can do this, and you have to have a setup to do it, but you have to have an interface or some type of output source where you can send to two different signals simultaneously, or two different outputs simultaneously. Specifically, we're talking about creating outputs for headphones here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select our tracks, and we're going to create some buses. So we're going to hold down Option Shift with our track selected, hit New Track, and we're going to do two stereo aux. So it's only going to do one for right now, but we'll call this headphone 1. All right, so we have headphone 1 created. And now we will create a second send. Select new track, and we'll call this headphone 2. And it will give us a second headphone send. Now, what you would want to do at this point is set up these two tracks to have different outputs, because if you have them at the same output, you're not really doing anything. You're just sending the exact same signal that you would have been sending in the first place. So in your output, depending on what interface you have or how you have it set up, you would want to send it somewhere that is available. Currently, line 1 and 2 is available, line 3 and 4, and line 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. Let's say I want to use lines 7 and 8 because my interface has 8 outputs. We'll just set the first output of this headphone to line 7 and 8, and then we'll go to the output of headphone 2 and set that up to be 5 and 6. Now, you're not going to be able to hear anything, and this honestly isn't going to really do anything. But the idea is that you're now going to be able to send different signals to different headphones. So let's say headphone 1 is for microphone 1, which is person 1. We're just keeping everything together here. And remember, they don't want to hear themselves, but they want to hear the other person. So on this send right here, if I just open it up, it pops open this little fader. And also if you command click on the send, it will open it up into like a fader mode. And so what I want to do is turn this headphone send to headphone 1 down because he doesn't want to hear himself. So I'll play it with this turned up, and you'll see that headphone 1, here I'll mute headphone 2 actually now that I'm thinking about it. Mute that one. So now we will get this audio signal into the headphones. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. So you see how this meter is now going off? Watch what happens when I turn this send fader down. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new... So when I adjust this send fader, it controls how much signal is going to this headphone 1 auxiliary, which is being sent to lines 7 and 8, which theoretically should be a headphone amp that is going to a pair of headphones that person 1 is wearing. So they don't want to hear themselves. I'll turn that down. But they do want to hear person 2. They want to be able to communicate with them. So we'll go to our headphone send 1 for person 2 using microphone 2. We'll unmute it and we'll press play and make sure that we're getting signal to headphone 1. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment, and today I want... So cool. So we'll test it and play about midway through person 1, transitioning to person 2 to make sure that the headphone is set up correctly. A guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment, and today I wanted to talk about... So it's set up exactly how we need it for person 1. Now person 2 wanted a different setup. They wanted to hear everyone else normal, but they wanted to hear themselves louder than everyone else. So here's what we'll do. We'll first go to the send for person 1, the headphone 2 send, pull up the fader, and we'll turn that to a point where they can hear it. A guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead. So cool, you can hear it. And then we'll go to microphone 2, which is person 2. And then we'll select and open the headphone 2 send. And then we'll turn that up about, let's say, just 6 or 7 dB. And now the signal should be much different going to the headphones. We have a special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment, and today... So I'm not sure if you could see or tell the difference, but when person 1 is talking, the green only peaks out to around halfway through the meter here, and then when person 2 starts talking, it gets pretty loud. So I'll show you again. We have a special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson and I'm the owner of TopKlass. So you see there was a huge volume difference there. So that's something that I think is useful, and it's not really a shortcut, but it definitely helps when you're doing podcasts. And especially if, you've never used Pro Tools before, you probably don't understand a lot of what's going on in here. I made some previous videos about how to do routing, create groups and buses and things like that. Feel free to check them out or shoot me a comment if you have. shoot me a comment if you have a specific question that I didn't answer in any previous video. Now, the next questions I want to address come from Real HVE or Real Hive. I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but he said, "Hey, nice tutorial. I've been getting into mixing and I'm curious about how your fader moves. Are they set to Pro Tools Classic? Also, I see you turn the clip gain off. Are you gain staging with the limiter? I have been having trouble mixing my beats and getting a nice balance on the spectrum analyzer and good tonal balance, I assume is what he's trying to say there. Any info would be great, and thanks." Appreciate the comment, Real HVE. So this question comes from a specific video where I discuss how to mix beat stems. I get a lot of questions in response to how to mix beats, and I think that's because there's a lot of beat makers out there that, just like me 10, 15 years ago, I was on YouTube trying to figure out how everyone else made their beats sound so good, and that's how the world kind of learns now, through YouTube. So to answer your question in regards to the video that you were specifically watching, my faders move because I have them set in a group. So let's say I want these 3 audio tracks right here to be in a group, which, by the way, to get to this screen, Command equal, mix window, edit window. I'm in the mix window right now. So in the mix window, or you can do it in the edit window, just select your tracks and then hit Command G. This will bring up your create group window. It by default does follow globals, and then if you click on the globals tab, this tells you what kind of generally all of your tracks are going to follow when a group is created. As long as you got volume and mute selected, you're pretty much good. You can always change them later and add stuff. Solos and automation mode is good to have too. Hit OK. And now I have a group that I can adjust the volume and mute all these tracks simultaneously. And that's super helpful if you have, a bunch of, stuff all playing together and you want to have control of it all. You move one fader and they all go together. You mute one thing or solo something. It all kind of does it together. The other thing is when you're editing, it will automatically select all of the tracks within the group as well. To briefly disable groups, you hit Command Shift G on the keyboard, and it will disable groups, so you can select 1 or 2 tracks, and you can also go and maybe make some changes to just 1, and then Command Shift G to enable the groups again, and now the groups are back active. Everything will work together. So that was what I did in the video. But then a question right after what you asked is, are they set to Pro Tools Classic? And so I know exactly what you mean when you ask that question. However, that has nothing to do with how my faders move. It has a lot to do with how the meters show you information. So if I right click on the actual meter here, it gives you a couple different options: sample, peak, Pro Tools Classic, linear, etc., etc., etc. And these are for different things. In Europe, they do different, readings because, that's just how they do it, For television, they have different readings that they use on their meters. Typically, I always have everything in sample peak. I don't even think I've ever changed it. I remember a while ago I looked into it, but it seemed irrelevant to me and confusing, so I just didn't mess with it. But if I put it into Pro Tools Classic, you'll see that these numbers change, and the way that the meters look are going to be slightly different. So I'll give you an example. So we will just select an area here and press play and look at how these meters react. Thanks for listening to Top Class Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's so you'll see as I'm talking the peak meter right here, or this little green meter, is a representation of the audio, and it's only coming up to, I guess that's negative 15 dB. I don't know. It's like there's a 15 right here. It's a little small, little thing. Um, and so, that's cool. But watch what happens when I put it in sample peak and press play. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music. So now the meter is a little bit higher up on the meter, but you'll also notice that the numbering is the same. It's 15. So it's not really, like, it doesn't change the audio. It changes how you, I guess, interpret and visualize the sound. What it's really doing is, instead of making this a range from 0 dB all the way down to negative 80, it's making it a much shorter range where the numbers are spread out a little bit differently. So, linear looks crazy. It shows you like a whole bunch of numbers. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks, which is kind of weird looking. Something else I will mention, your tracks don't all correspond to the same value. So audio tracks, auxiliary tracks, instrumental tracks, if you right click and select a different metering type, it will change those, but it will not change the master fader. So look, when I change these to linear, the master fader is not changing. And so if I put these back to sample peak, it's kind of back to where I had it before. And watch what happens when I change the master fader. It goes into linear metering mode, but the other tracks don't. So specifically, you're able to change your master fader within your session to have different metering types. And that's going to be what can help you when you're going to a studio that primarily, runs on tape or analog gear, and the meters on those are different than digital meters. Chances are you will clip and peak on an analog board if you try to play, just everything normalized to 0 in Pro Tools. The signals are just different. So that's kind of, I think, what you were asking me. And the comment is, are they set to Pro Tools Classic? And then you also say, I see you turn the clip gain off. Are you gain staging with the limiter? So clip gain I don't have turned off. There's a line that I can show. So if I right click on an audio clip and then go to clip gain, I can click show line. And this line is a representation of where the audio is. And if it's right in the middle of the audio, then it's at pretty much 0 dB. But if I move the volume up, the line and the clips will change. So what you were asking, I believe, is if I do clip gaining with my limiter. And the answer is no, I don't do gain staging with my limiter necessarily, but I can if I wanted to. When I do use clip gain is, say there is, so when I first start talking, there's this very first word right here that comes in, and it's just louder than everything else. And I'll prove that by first opening up my limiter that I have on my master fader, and watch the peak values on this limiter right here when I press play. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music. It would help if I had this down here. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss. So you'll see when I say thanks, this meter is peaking a lot. And it's a limiter, so it's having to reduce, 6, 7 dB. And I maybe don't want that because it might make it sound a little bit funky. And if you play through the rest of it, it's like barely even doing anything. So I'll play it again and watch when I first come in and say thanks. the limiter, clips it off a lot, and then everything else is just kind of subtly just there just to kind of make everything level. Thanks for listening to Top Class Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things. So yeah, it's not really doing anything. It had a little moment on guest, but for the most part, this thanks is, excuse me, it's too loud. So what I'll do is I'll go in and I will turn off groups, so we're only selecting this track. And if I have show clip gain line enabled, it gives me this line, and then I can just drag just this line here down to make this word a little bit more level with everything else. So I'll play it and see what it looks like on my meter. Thanks for listening to Top Class Tutorials. So it's much better than what it was before. Turn it down a little bit more. Thanks for listening to Top Class Tutorial. All right, perfect. It's not hitting the meter as hard. It still sounds natural. It doesn't sound artificial, like, one word is louder or softer than the other. So that's when I'll do clip gaining a lot of times. And then for getting more volume out of something, I will use a limiter. And this also goes back to the previous comment from my stuttering life. Some pro tips for podcasters: put a limiter that has a meter on there, so that way you can make sure your audio is the same volume for each podcast that you do. It sucks when you go to watch, these YouTube videos and one person's video is really well produced, the voiceover is nice, or the podcast is really good, and then you watch another video where the podcast is really bad and there's an audio difference, and so, you can't hear this one, turn the volume up, and then you go to the next podcast and all of a sudden it's super loud, you have to turn the volume down. So to me, that's annoying. There is a standard on YouTube and radio and CD streaming services. Yeah, I'm old school, y'all. I used to have CDs, but for streaming services, there's a standard level for your audio. It can't go past a certain decibels, or they won't, stream it, or they'll automatically knock it down to whatever they set their standard at. So, that being said, the limiter is used to get more volume out of something, but it's also used to set the levels to a level or a standard, so you can have consistently volume leveled vocals. Let me demonstrate that. So I'll play all of this stuff, and I will make some adjustments on my limiter here. Thanks for listening to Top Class Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson, and I'm the owner of TopKlass. So it started off low in volume, and then I brought it back up to volume. But I want to use this limiter to control the peaks. But the problem is my ceiling is all the way up at 0 dB. So the closer I bring this threshold to my audio, the more that this limiter is going to push it towards 0 dB. And you don't want your podcast to be at 0 dB. That is extremely too loud for a podcast. Music is usually pushed up to -1, or in some scenarios -0.1 dB, just so it doesn't hit 0 dB, because with music we're competing against other artists and musicians, and so more loud is more better. It's known as the loudness war. Anyone that knows about music and the loudness war, it's been going on for years, but finally with streaming services they're trying to create a standard. So anywho, podcast, you don't want your ceiling to be at 0 dB. You probably want your ceiling to be gosh, probably somewhere in like the negative like 15, negative 20 dB area. Um, and that's just based off of my experience. You know, when you have your vocals talking at a certain level, it starts to sound really bad if it's too loud. So now I'll just press play again, and I'll adjust my threshold to where it's just kind of clipping and taming those peaks, so it's, you know, all kind of at the same level, and then I'll adjust my ceiling accordingly. Thanks for listening to TopKlass Tutorials, your source for all music production tips and tricks. Today we have a special guest that's going to discuss some new and exciting things happening at TopKlass Studio. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay, so my name is Travis Jackson, and I'm the owner of TopKlass Entertainment, and today I wanted to talk about how to properly set up and record podcasts. Okay, so to me, that's probably louder than what I would want it to be. But it's a good volume. You can hear it. It's not, you know, too close to 0 dB. I'm looking at my meters here. My LUFS is at negative 20. That's cool. Usually like negative 24 is kind of the mark that I'm shooting for. So in response to the first comment of podcasting tips and tricks, this is a tip and trick that I would recommend, using a limiter just to get all your levels set to where they need to be. And also in response to the second comment, do I use a limiter for gain staging? Yeah, primarily. I don't focus on, if I want something loud, I don't just always just shoot for just grabbing a fader and turning it up. I try to think of, you know, ways to make my job easier. So if I just put if I put a limiter on the master fader and just get a good balance on my mix, I then use my limiter to kind of bring everything up to volume to where I can hear things better. I've been having trouble mixing beats and getting a nice balance on the spectrum analyzer. So I think I know what you're talking about with that. I have a spectral analyzer that I will use sometimes as well, so that I can just visually kind of get a representation of what's going on. So I'll give you an example here. So I will first import a song that I'm currently working on. Sorry for the delay. And we'll go to find it. And we'll just drag and drop this in here. And I'm going to get rid of my limiter here. Solo this track out. So it is processing this audio. Okay, so cool. Make this bigger. So I have this song that I'm working on right here. I will play a snippet of it. But first, I'm going to go to insert this plugin. Now, I use this plugin called Isotope Insight. Isotope Insight is a great plugin for just using it for meters. Like, it doesn't really add any effects or really help you mix, but it just gives you metering tools that give you a better idea of really kind of what's going on. So on this spectrum right here, I'll press play, and you'll see it'll give me kind of a representation of all the frequencies across the frequency spectrum.
Let's lose this crowd, break out in silence, leave this town, brand new horizons, beyond the clouds, sky full of diamonds, gotta get up, yeah, break out in silence, lose this crowd, break out.
I change these settings, spectrum settings right here. So if I change this to have a peak hold time of louder, and we'll set the hold time to something like 10 seconds and show peak hold. And these are the settings that I would use to get a better understanding of how the frequencies are kind of happening across time.
It's better. Let's lose this crowd. Break out in silence. Leave this town. Brand new horizons beyond the clouds. Sky full of diamonds. Gotta get up, yeah. Break out in silence. Lose this crowd. Break out in silence. Leave this town. Brand new horizons beyond the clouds.
So you'll see that it will hold a little bit longer and gives me a better idea of frequencies that are standing out. So I'll press play again, and you'll notice there are some peak frequencies that stand out.
It's better. Let's lose this crowd. Break out in silence. Leave this town. Brand new horizons beyond the clouds. Sky full of diamonds. Gotta get up, yeah. Break out in silence. Lose this crowd. Break out in silence. Leave this town. Brand new horizons beyond the clouds. Sky full of diamonds. Gotta get up, yeah. Break out in silence.
So you'll see right here, there's like 382 hertz that's peaking out. There's another at like 774. So that's how I find kind of maybe resonating frequencies that are standing out a little bit more than other frequencies. And then if we're just talking about just tonal balance and just kind of how the song just feels, we'll turn off this peak hold time down to a normal time and take peak hold off. And let's set this up to be something like 5 seconds. And then I'll press play.
It's better. Let's lose this crowd. Break out in silence. Leave this town. Brand new horizons beyond the clouds. Sky full of diamonds. Gotta get up, yeah. Break out in silence. Lose this crowd. Break out in silence. Leave this town. Brand new.
So if what you're asking me, if you're looking at an analyzer and then going based off what the analyzer kind of tells you, that's not a bad idea, but it's also important to really just use your ears when you're mixing your songs. There are songs where like the snare and like the hi-hat are really like louder than what you maybe think they should be, but it has a vibe to it. Like it really helps carry the music, or maybe the bass is really like louder in one of your songs versus some of your other songs, but it's because the bass has a good melody and it helps carry things. You know, it's just about using your ears. Do what feels right, but also don't hesitate to use your meters to maybe guide you in the direction that you think it should go. One thing I will say, there's a plugin called Tonal Balance that I use from iZotope. I don't use it as much anymore. I really use a lot of reference tracks. If you don't use reference tracks, basically what that means is, say you're working on a beat or a song and you have another like song that's similar to it that you really like, you basically you know, import it into your session. However you do that, whether you purchase it or you happen to just have a copy of that song in your computer for whatever reason, and you copy it into your session, and you'll play the reference song, and then you'll mute that one and then play your beat or your mix and get the volume the same. You'll get the reference at the same volume as your beat or whatever you're working on, and just mute them back and forth. And that way you have an idea frequency wise, you know, maybe what your music is missing or what you should turn up or down. It also helps if you don't have a really good room with good speakers that has acoustic treatment. If you know how a reference song sounds in your studio and you know that the reference song was mixed, you know, great, it doesn't have any issues, then you use that as a comparison to know how your music should sound in your studio setup. So anywho, this is the other plugin that I was talking about, tonal balance control. It basically looks at multiple genres and decides what the best range for certain frequencies are supposed to be. So if I change this to hip hop, or I'll change it to country, let's go to fine. Nothing's changing. Okay, there we go. So if I change this to EDM, you'll see that these curves kind of change a little bit. Funk has a different kind of curve to it. Modern has a different curve. Pop has a different curve. And the idea is that you want this white line to fit within this curve. Now, I used to use this a lot, but again, I stopped using it mostly because I just kind of figured out like what my music kind of needed to sound like. But I'll play it and you'll see this white line that kind of fits within this green area.
Let's lose this crowd, break out in silence, leave this town, brand new horizons beyond the clouds, sky full of diamonds, gotta get up, yeah, break out in silence, lose this crowd, break out in silence, leave this town, brand new horizons beyond the clouds, sky full of diamonds, gotta get up, yeah, break out in silence.
So based off of just the the frequency spectrum here, you could say that it's technically correct, but maybe there's a subtle thing that you hear in there, like, oh, I just want the vocals to have a little bit more presence, turn them up a little bit more, or maybe a little bit less presence, turn them down. Maybe there's too much going on in the bass and you want to turn the bass down, or maybe it's the other way around, you want to turn the bass up. So it's really just kind of about use your meters again to guide you. Don't always think that your meters and your frequency analyzers are the definitive right or wrong way to do something. It's all about being creative and using your ears. So I think that's all of the questions that I wanted to answer today. If you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.